over the last couple of years, actually since about 2017, in fact, at KubeCon was when we were really starting to realize that doing something in the Kubernetes space was going to be a must. So I'm going to cover some of the things that I see as a field technician, as a field resource with Splunk, and kind of what we're seeing. Making the lawyers happy here, because again, I want to tell you about what I think might happen. Just because I say I think might happen doesn't mean it's going to happen, and hopefully it doesn't get me arrested or fined by the SEC. Okay, I don't got money like Elon to be making jokes like that. Okay, so if you don't know who Splunk is, again, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but we're your friendly neighbor. We've got a nice big building down here in Santana Row. It's actually the first time I've been there, so it's actually nice to kind of come down and join you guys. I'm from north of the wall in Canada, so it's actually kind of nice to escape there right now. Again, I come down here quite often, but usually to HQ in San Francisco, so where we're kind of born. So a couple stats up there. I'm sure you know us. We do a lot of things. People like to say we do logging. We're a data platform. We do many things. And actually, as a user myself in the telco space, it was one of the things that endeared me to Splunk the most, was that it was just something that I knew there was always going to be change. There was going to be another thing to integrate into. And so this talk is kind of covering that, because Kubernetes is just another one of those things. And there will always be another one, right? And so that's some of the power of the Splunk platform. Really, when you boil it down, all we're trying to do is make data accessible. A lot of tools out there do a lot of things, and at the end of the day, where Splunk really tries to excel is everyone in the org can make better decisions if you give them data. So what about Kubernetes? So Kubernetes, we've had a couple of different themes that we get pulled into, whether it would be with customers, with partners, or just the greater marketplace. And so the major themes that we're looking at or playing in right now kind of fall into three major categories. The first block, Splunk Connect for Kubernetes, or getting data in as we call it, is the only actual kind of GA product that I'm going to show you today. This is something that's available right now. It's an open source project that's available on GitHub that allows you to deploy to your Kubernetes clusters and get data out. And again, the data is logging, metrics, and metadata. So again, it's a little bit more broad than logging, but obviously you can just turn on the logging if you like. The second kind of thread that we get talked to about by customers as well is, okay, cool, now I'm monitoring my clusters, that's amazing. When are you gonna jump in there? Right, you're using a lot of rack space in my data center, or I wanna move you around and be more elastic. So running Splunk itself inside Kubernetes is another topic that we talk to customers a lot about. Now that's going to be a fun one, and I'll save some time for that one, because we're a monolith. We're the thing that you're not supposed to put in Docker. We're the thing that is going to break all the rules of the church of Docker. And so I'm here to repent for a couple of things, and we'll show you a little bit more about that. And then the Splunk operator, or a Splunk operator, it doesn't exist. It may never exist, but I want to tell you about kind of some of the work we've done to start investigating and poking around in there. Because again, we're a software company as well, right? We look around at technology just like our customers do, and it's actually one of the fun things about working at Splunk is you get to know so much of other people's technology as you go. Let's jump into the first piece, because again, this is something you can try right away. This is Splunk Connect for Kubernetes. It's version 1.1 was just released. Actually, if I can escape here, let's see you mess around with Diane's laptop. Diane's email. Yeah. So if you just Google Splunk Connect for Kubernetes, you'll find it on GitHub. Again, it is a completely Splunk-built, Splunk-supported project. Just because it's on GitHub doesn't mean it's something we just threw out there. It's something that we're hoping allows us to have much better feedback on products and loop them in. And so that's what this 1.1 release is. It just allows, it has a lot of great new features that customers ask for, using us to collect their OpenShift data or their Kubernetes data over the last year since it's been out. So taking a look at it, it's just really simple. It's just a Helm chart that deploys 3 types of pods to your cluster. One of them is a logging daemon set that's based on FluentD. It's not the FluentD you would get with a EFK stack, or that you would find it there. We've taken it in, we've kind of stripped it down and built our own plugins to put inside of it. One of the One of the other new one is actually a daemon set as well for metric collection. We rebuilt it from scratch, obviously with Heapster being deprecated recently. So this is a Splunk built integration that will allow you to collect metrics from your cluster, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later. But again, supported fully open source, and we're really just trying to support the CNCF projects. Fluentd does it well, so why not, right? So collecting data from the cluster is interesting. And so the learnings that we had by when customers would bring us in, because this started around 2017, where customer brings you in, you give them their swag, they're happy to see you because they want another t-shirt. And then they say, how are you going to monitor Kubernetes? And you're kind of like, what do you mean? And so really that's the life of a Splunker. You get thrown into, and it's always what I liked about it, was you get thrown into new technologies, you got to figure out how to get the data out. And so this was the answer to that. Now, running it in OpenShift and Kubernetes has been interesting. We do all the development against open source Kubernetes, but it's been nice to know that we're only just kind of another couple steps away from getting it to run and be fine in OpenShift. And I think Matt and Paul hit it the best. It's like when you go to run your product in OpenShift, you really do get to see, how secure have I made this? What kind of permissions do I need to look at to be able to run this in this more kind of secured environment? So to get it to run in OpenShift, and we do have customers, OpenShift customers were really the first ones that were really, banging the drum to get in there. I don't know, maybe it's just, enterprise logging strategy is Splunk, and they have this new enterprise strategy with OpenShift. They want to marry them, right? And so early last year with the first release, we were working with large banks, large Splunk customers, and OpenShift was a common platform, and still is, that I see in the bulk of the calls that I'm doing today with Kubernetes customers. And so getting it to run in Kubernetes, it needs root. It just does. Again, good old Docker. I think we'll get into them in a minute. But at the end of the day, everything that we built inside of the Splunk Connect for Kubernetes package works perfectly fine inside of OpenShift with a couple of tweaks. So generally what I'll do with the customer is we'll sit down and we'll either Helm template and just burn the manifest down and then use those to deploy using OC apply, or we'll put Helm in the cluster. With OpenShift customers, it's been kind of 50-50. We assumed, again, that people wouldn't run it, right? They wouldn't be running Helm, but I'm kind of surprised. Generally, I go in and they're like, no, we got Helm. And usually I'm like, okay, good, here you go. And so that makes it a little bit easier. But what I'm highlighting here is for the actual logging pods and the metrics pods for Splunk Connect for Kubernetes, is just like the two pieces of information that kind of give it the keys to the castle. And so the only real changes to the actual manifest beyond adding sort of Red Hat specific API endpoints to some of the collection, data collection, are these kind of updates to the manifest here. So again, that'll get you going on OpenShift for collecting data. Again, some of the other useful things that we found that are required when you're deploying something like this is you can't just put privilege in the actual manifest. You have to then go give the service account privilege to have the privilege. So again, it's great security practice. And so again, I just try to have a couple of collection of commands that are helpful for OpenShift customers when they go to deploy Splunk Connect for Kubernetes. So again, I think what it does is just highlights kind of some of the deep down kind of OpenShift security mechanisms that are there. And it's good to get to know them, especially as you start to get deeper with OpenShift, to understand kind of how you control that access. Who do you give it to? How do you give it to them, et cetera. The other one is OpenShift ships with default node selectors in the namespaces. And so again, just as part of learning OpenShift, as someone who had played with this in open source Kubernetes, this was another thing that you could bang your head a little bit for, like, why is my pod not? I've had a couple of customers call me up and be like, why are these pods not scheduling everywhere? I want them to go everywhere. And it's, again, we learn OpenShift together. and so that's been the trend, right? The customers and all of us are learning as we go, which is fun. And so these are just some of the items that we've taken away. And then again, Helm, like everyone has their feeling on Helm and all that. I think locally, you don't even have to run Tiller in the cluster. Just using it to avoid the fat fingering and YAML, hand coding the YAML is a great little trick. I don't know if a lot of people use it, but I tend to use it now that we use the Helm chart as well. So once you run it, it looks something like this. So this is a 3-node cluster, just a simple development cluster. And so you'll see the logging pods will run on each of the nodes as well as the metrics pods. And then there's a metrics aggregator deployment and an objects deployment. The aggregator is actually just talking to the API and getting summary metrics to feed into Splunk. And the Kubernetes objects pod is scraping the API for metadata. And so this comes into sort of how we've been able to kind of improve some experience for some customers over just like generic FluentD plugins. And you might be thinking like, well, why would I use this one over the other one? That ability to kind of separate that metadata collection and not have to do it for every single log line that's in a 100,000 line log before you send it to your indexing cluster is a nice performance gain. So that's kind of the design logic behind that. And so once you deploy it, I usually send a raincoat to the Splunk admin because that's what they feel like, because they don't actually really know Kubernetes. And when they hear that when I turn this thing on, you get everything from the cluster, it's a big dynamic shift versus what it used to be where someone would come kiss the Splunk admin's ring and they would fill in a form and say, my logs live in this directory. And then it would take 2 weeks and then finally some logs would show up. Here, we're in there with the devs in an hour. They drop it in the cluster, and they have everything from their cluster flowing in. So they hyperventilate. That little guy there, the Splunk admin, that gal or girl is hyperventilating a little bit. And we just teach them how to filter and teach them how to monitor their ingestion. Right? So some of the observations that we get, again, we have some optimized logging formatting versus some of the kind of this idea that crappy logs inside of a JSON payload are better logs. They're still just crappy logs. And indexing a giant JSON payload is even worse. And so when we index, and that sucks that my computer's not there. I was going to show you, basically when an event comes into Splunk, it is, if you've seen it come out into Kibana out of EFK or out of Fluent into another indexing system, you'll see that your log message is a key inside of a JSON payload. And trying to work with that is kind of a little bit gnarly, right? And so when we index it, we actually have built one of the cooler plugins that we built for the connector is a JQ plugin. So you can actually use that crazy power of JQ to actually unwrap that JSON, that Docker JSON log. And not only does that make the actual TCO and footprint of that data much smaller, a 100-line log is still just a 100-line log, but we're able to keep all that great metadata and use Splunk tricks, right? The actual Splunk platform to index those important fields as what we call index time fields, which don't count against license, and they're not they don't bloat your logs. So these are some of the learnings we got from working with our customers. Again, optimizing the logging format to make sure that people could reduce their storage footprint and actually have the retention that they want. Multi-line logging is a super hot topic. Everybody, the first thing they do once they get their logs in is now they got to deal with their stack traces, their custom logging, and trying to set those things is something we're continually working on to make it easier and easier. Right now, you'd have to kind of update the config map to do those kind of things. And then other things that people are really, really interested in as they move to more of an enterprise grade kind of solution is RBAC and routing. Making sure that logs for this team go to that place, for this app team go to there. And so then container certification with Red Hat is something that we're looking at. It's taken a while, but we're trying our best to get in there so that we can get into the container marketplace. So again, covering the last two. So these are the last two boxes that I was telling you about. These are more adventures that we're on right now. So Splunk, this is where I'm going to duck maybe if there's any purists in the room. In October 2018, we released Splunk official Docker images. Those images, again, are a lift and shift. They are not a refactor of Splunk in any way. They're things that, that's something that is on the horizon kind of thing for Splunk, not something that's available today. However, there's still benefits of running inside of a containerized environment for our users. Easier test, faster deploy, more reliable deploys. And so this is available, the Splunk image is available there, and if you've ever wanted to try it, it's a great way to get started. It actually uses Ansible as the entry point. That's usually where I duck. We're in a Red Hat room, so I shouldn't be that scared. But that can be a little bit of a controversial thing. For me as a practitioner, I could care less. It works real good. Because when you bring up a monolith inside of a container, the orchestration at the app layer, like Matt and Paul said, there's a lot of work to do there. It's not, hey, I started a container, cool. Now go orchestrate it with a whole cluster of 40 of them that all need to know what they're doing about replication and all that. It's not an easy task. So this has been kind of a nice kind of middle ground for us so far. So what I've done is there's a couple of blogs out there. If you just Google Splunk Enterprise on Kubernetes, we took an early look, some test scenarios that are available that you can try in our Docker GitHub repo that will allow you to try running Splunk in Kubernetes and some of the decisions we made. And so running it in OpenShift, again, was much of the same. It worked really well once we got the privilege straight. And I think this is one of the things that I try to do with the teams inside of Splunk is to show, expose them to what these different platforms do and what it's going to be like to run inside them. Because while the examples will run perfectly fine in OSS K8s, they will not run in OpenShift unless you figure out the security. And again, this is where for the Docker container, we got to figure out what we want to do because it has some sudo in that Ansible. Not a thing that OpenShift likes. And I'll try and wrap it up quickly here before lunch. The last thing is operators. And again, this is just something that we're experimenting with. So I just want to be very clear about that. It'll just be a kind of a nice little note here of us learning from all of you or anybody that is going to go and try operators. We had a little, I guess you could call it, a POC internally, and where we started was real simple. Learning the SDK, taking a poke around, looking at what's involved, what's this going to mean for us, what will it give us, and why. And again, the reasons are all the same across all of these tools, is to make it simpler for our users to get to what they're supposed to be doing, which is working with the data. Right, so much of these tool sets and so much of the actual logging and monitoring is spent in the weeds with caring and feeding. And at the end of the day, you just got to get the insight out. Nobody's going to ask you how you got it if you have the right answer on that 3 a.m. bridge, right? So those are and so again, encoding best practices. The horrors I have seen, when you leave customers with a big shotgun pointing at their feet, right? And Splunk can be like that sometimes. I mean, we know it the most, right? And so this presents an interesting opportunity for us to really encode that knowledge in there and not have to kind of, you don't need 3 people with a funny hat, to run your deployment. And so some of our team that were here and some of the people that work at Splunk had a hack at it, and we were able to get a pretty nice little start on it, where we were able to create an operator pod that would instantiate Splunk instances and some auxiliary software that we use. You could imagine, where this could be really helpful, right? Syslog gets used a lot, and we rely on a lot of open source projects like syslog-ng or our syslog. And being able to, declare these things is actually quite nice. It's a big departure from what the life of a Splunk admin is today. So on the left-hand side there, I'm just giving you a brief look at how simplified this could actually get. Where today, if you were going to go build a 3-indexer Splunk cluster and with 3 search heads, you're going to be there for a while doing that. Whereas here, you can literally declare it, and it is so. So it's an interesting opportunity for us to try to make this better for our customers. And so that, wrapping up finally, really as we look across the Kubernetes landscape, whether it be collecting the data, working with Kubernetes tools to make our software easier or better, or just to, just playing in the ecosystem at all, the major items we're looking at is, repeatable and declarative deployments. That would make a lot of Splunk users' life so much better than kind of bespoke, kind of, voodoo in the data center by some specialist that you have to call every time. And then obviously the immense power of the API in Kubernetes and in OpenShift, allowing managing our software to be much, much easier. And then again, all of this is about value. I mean, I think that's my big thing as a former customer and a person that faces customers all the time. It's about the data. Like, it's really not about what's working under there. There's a lot of tools. Like, the Uber folks just showed you another tool that's very, does a lot of the things. And so again, I'm sure they'd even tell you they do it because of the answers that come out the pipe on the other end. And so as much as we can make that administrative life much, much easier, we think it'll open us up to a new kind of customer, developers, people that are not going to spend their time fiddling away with deploying tools. And so I'll make sure Diane gets a copy, and there's a lot of great links in there, a lot of cool stuff to try. What we're here to do, again, is to learn and be part of the community. We're not telling you that we have the way for you to forward or teach you how to do it. We actually want to work with you and understand how we should do it, how we should go about this. Do you like these ways? Would you use them? And so happy to hear about them, or you can join us in some of the GitHub repos. The major ones you want to check out is our Docker Splunk repo. Again, I apologize for the computer. I had a couple things I wanted to show you a little bit beyond that. But if you check out the repos, you can find me there. And yeah, check it out. Hopefully it'll make it a little easier for you to try in the future. So thanks for your time, everyone.